Because it is terrifying. You've got one shot at it, and that's it. And being live, you never know what's going to go wrong. I spent one scene holding up a set because it had fallen down one afternoon, trying to look casual.
Every single day, I drop a fresh video about the legends who ruled Hollywood's golden age. If this kind of drama and glamour keeps you hooked, don't forget to hit subscribe, like the video, or drop a comment. It means the world and doesn't cost a thing. Now let's dive straight into this shocking story. Elizabeth Montgomery's daughter has just rocked Hollywood to its core, breaking 30 years of silence with one haunting confession. My mother betrayed everyone. Her husband, her father, and even the angelic image the world adored. Those words hit like a storm. The world had worshipped Elizabeth, the woman who played Samantha, the charming witch from Bewitched. But behind that sparkling smile and flawless grace was a life full of secrets and heartbreak. Elizabeth believed in magic, not just on screen, but in real life. She thought it could make people forget the truth. But that belief became her downfall. Because while America saw her as a perfect star, her private world was cracking from the inside. A daughter pushed away by her own father, a wife caught up in betrayal, and a woman desperate to control destiny with something far darker than just charm. So why did it take 3 whole decades after her death for her daughter to finally tell the truth? What could possibly make a family hide a story this explosive for nearly half a century? Was it shame? Fear? Or maybe they really believed the bewitched curse was real. To find out, we have to rewind to 1951, when 18-year-old Elizabeth Montgomery stood before the glittering gates of Hollywood and boldly said, "I will write the magic of my own life." But nobody knew those words would mark the beginning of a heartbreaking tragedy. It was a freezing New York winter, 1951. The wind howled through the long city streets, and inside a red brick house on East 61st Street, young Elizabeth faced the biggest decision of her life. She had just enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, the same school her father, the legendary Robert Montgomery, had forbidden her to ever attend. Robert Montgomery, a proud icon of Hollywood's golden era, was confident, polished, and stubborn beyond belief. In their Beverly Hills mansion, everything was perfect on the surface. But behind those expensive walls, control ruled every corner. And Elizabeth, she was about to break every rule her father ever set. Dinner at the Montgomery mansion wasn't just a meal. It was a cold, picture-perfect ritual. Elizabeth had to sit tall, silent, and flawless, her every move under her father's sharp gaze. No one dared to break the rules, and she was strictly forbidden to ever utter the words acting or film. Robert's voice would slice through the air, calm but dripping with disdain, as he repeated his favorite line, "Hollywood is no place for a decent woman." To Robert Montgomery, the glamour of the screen was nothing but a world of liars and make-believe. He saw actors as fakes and swore his daughter would never become one of them. But deep inside that pristine, suffocating home, Elizabeth's secret passion blazed like fire, quiet, dangerous, and unstoppable. Since she was little, she had been fascinated by the movie sets her father took her to. She loved the way the light danced on the actors' faces, the soft hum of the camera, the thrill in the air. It all felt alive, like the heartbeat of another world, where she could become anyone she wanted to be. At just 17, during a visit to the MGM studios, Elizabeth watched her father perform and whispered softly, "Daddy, I want to stand there in front of the camera like you." His head snapped around, his eyes cold as ice. Then came the words that crushed her. "No, I didn't raise an actress. I raised a lady." That moment hit her like a blade straight to the heart. She didn't argue, but inside, she made a silent promise. If her father wouldn't open the door, she'd break through it herself. Months later, she secretly sent off her application to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. She told no one. The only clue she left behind was a note on her father's desk that read, "I'm going to learn how to live, not how to please you." When Robert found out, he lost control. The maid later revealed he tore through the room in a rage, slammed the note to the floor, stomped on it, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "That girl will regret ever bearing the Montgomery name." From that explosive day forward, the mansion turned into a cold battlefield. Father and daughter barely exchanged a word, Silence echoed through every hallway. Even dinner felt like punishment. The only sounds were the sharp clinks of silverware hitting porcelain. The air was thick with tension, heavy enough to choke on. But here's the twist. It was Robert himself who accidentally gave Elizabeth her very first step into acting. When his TV series, Robert Montgomery Presents, premiered, he allowed her a small role, pretending it was an act of peace. Yet behind that gesture hid pride and control. When the episode finally aired and Elizabeth Montgomery appeared on the screen, Robert's calm mask shattered. He lit a cigarette, narrowed his eyes, and growled to his assistant, "Erase that name from my show. No one uses my name to make themselves famous." The entire studio froze. No one dared to breathe. That night, Elizabeth went home, locked her bedroom door, and lit a single candle. With shaky hands, she opened her diary and wrote,
until quite late, until we started working with scripts and things like that, and it just kind of worked out that I had a boy and Samantha had a girl.
"If my father won't let me bear the Montgomery name, I'll make the world remember it." Those words became her vow. From that moment, she stopped looking for her father's approval. She was ready to carve her own legend. She packed her bags, left home, and rented a tiny apartment in Manhattan. During the day, she studied acting. At night, she worked any job she could find just to survive. Every small role she landed was more than work. It was rebellion in motion. A silent protest screamed through her talent. Meanwhile, in Beverly Hills, Robert never missed a chance to make his pride known. At lavish parties, he would sip his drink and say coldly, "That girl is no daughter of mine." His words stung, but Elizabeth had already outgrown his shadow. Years later, when she had become a beloved TV icon, one of Robert's old friends spotted him sitting alone in a dimly lit bar. On the screen, Bewitched was playing, and there she was, his daughter, dazzling the nation. When her name appeared, Robert smiled faintly and muttered almost to himself, "She's good, but she'll never escape my shadow." No one could tell if that smile carried pride or bitterness. But for Elizabeth, it didn't matter anymore. She had done it. She was her own woman, standing proudly before the camera, exactly as she once dreamed. The price of freedom hit hard. Her father's rejection carved a wound she could never shake off. It wasn't just distance. It was a scar that followed her everywhere. No matter how high she climbed, that pain stayed tucked behind the smile, reminding her who first shut the door in her face. It was like her heart had a compass locked to one name, Robert Montgomery. The more she tried to break away, the more life spun her right back into his shadow, like gravity she couldn't dodge. And when she finally stepped out of her family's house to build her own life, her love stories started to repeat the same script. Pretty at first, then painful, then impossible to ignore. New York, 1954. After 2 tough years grinding in Manhattan, Elizabeth did the one thing Robert always approved of. She married Frederick Gallatin. He was young, loaded, polished, the perfect gentleman by Montgomery standards. The wedding was classy and quiet, spring in the air, white flowers on the tables, crystals shining under soft light, the exact picture of stability her father praised. It looked safe, proper and tidy, like a life planned on fine stationery. But safety came with a price. A few months later, that wedding dress was collecting dust in the closet, and she was staring out over the Hudson, realizing she'd become someone's wife instead of being Elizabeth. Frederick was kind and careful, but he wanted her off the stage, smiling from the sidelines like a pleasant painting in an Upper East Side living room.
No, there was one explosion that we had to do one afternoon, and we were working in our kitchen here on the set, which is fairly confined, and it's near a back wall, so all the heat, kind of brings everything in like this. And it had not been tried in that closest space before, and I had to stand in the middle of this thing all the way around like this, the smoke and the flames. And
She could feel herself fading, and that was a deal she couldn't sign, not even for comfort. By autumn, the marriage ended as neatly as it began. Clean break, lesson learned. She left New York with a truth that cut deep. Love isn't enough if it can't hold your dreams, too. Los Angeles, 1956. The West Coast lit up like the 4th of July, and Elizabeth got swept up by Gig Young, a star with charm, looks, and danger written all over him. There was something about Gig Young that Elizabeth couldn't put into words, a kind of power that pulled her in. That same power, she'd later realize, was just an echo of her father's shadow haunting her all over again. Hollywood insiders whispered that during a fancy Beverly Hills party in 1956, Robert Montgomery stood before the crowd and said coldly, "She's no longer my daughter." If that was true, those words must have hit Elizabeth's heart like a hammer, pushing her straight into Gig's arms even harder. But that relationship was a storm dressed as romance. Gig's charm was magnetic, his smile sharp, but behind it lurked something dark: alcohol, anger, and bursts of violence. On the Culver City set one day, people saw Elizabeth step out of a trailer with smeared lipstick and red, swollen eyes. Gig followed her out, his voice low and cutting as he muttered, "She's too sensitive to be an actress." That line burned through her. Part insult, part wound, she'd carry long after the cameras stopped rolling. Their love turned into a steep, slippery slope made of passion, tears, and pain. When it finally crashed, Elizabeth didn't walk away. She crawled out like a survivor from a wreck, breathing, but forever marked by something she couldn't remove. A piece of broken glass lodged right in her heart. Then came 1963, Malibu sunsets, Gower Studios, and a new beginning. Out of that chaos rose William Asher, a director whose talent and warmth felt like sunlight after years of storm. He didn't just see Elizabeth, he understood her. He noticed her rhythm on set, the fear behind her eyes, and the delicate way she built her characters from tiny, invisible emotions. Their connection grew fast, built from creative sparks that soon turned into real love. And from that love, history was made. Their bond gave birth to one of the most iconic shows in American television history, Bewitched. By 1964, Los Angeles was alive with energy, a city moving like a jazz melody, wild, vibrant, and unpredictable. And in the middle of it all, Elizabeth Montgomery was finally shining on her own terms. On screen, Elizabeth's Samantha could twitch her nose and make magic happen. And off-screen, her real life with William Asher seemed just as enchanted. Together, they had built a family, a home, and a TV empire that America adored. People used to say that Stage 5 at the studio felt more like a cozy house than a workplace. It even had that warm, lived-in energy, like the smell of fresh coffee and laughter echoing through the halls. When Elizabeth became pregnant, the scripts cleverly hid her growing belly behind witty, magical storylines that made audiences smile. And behind the camera, William would watch her perform, grinning proudly every time she hit that perfect comedic rhythm. It was, without question, the happiest chapter of her life. But beneath that glow, something familiar was beginning to stir again. Because as perfect as things looked, the Montgomery loop had quietly started spinning back. William wasn't just her partner, he was also her rhythm keeper, her mentor, and sometimes her controller. His brilliance was undeniable, sharp, disciplined, and confident to the point of dominance. And while Elizabeth loved him deeply, his certainty began to fill every space until she felt like she was gasping for her own air. It was as if fate had sent her another version of Robert, charming, powerful, but so sure of himself that he didn't even realize how much space he took up. Slowly, the laughter on set turned quieter. Love turned into production schedules. They'd pass each other in the halls, trade quick smiles, and keep walking. A compliment half swallowed. A hand that reached out, but never met. By the late 1960s, Beverly Hills was pulsing with long, glittering parties and whispered gossip. Rumors of William's late-night calls and secret affairs slipped through the mansion like cold wind at midnight. Elizabeth never confronted him, at least not out loud. But in her diary, she left one chilling line. "I like a man who pauses to hear himself breathe at the edge." That one sentence said everything: exhaustion, awareness, and quiet heartbreak. When the cracks between them finally split wide open, Elizabeth reached for a new rhythm, one that made her feel alive again. She found it beside Richard Michaels, the young director working on Bewitched's 8th season. In Richard, she didn't find control or authority. She found something softer, a man who actually listened, not to a star, not to Samantha, but to Elizabeth, the woman beneath all the magic. They started a secret affair, and the fallout came fast. A clean cut on the Columbia Screen Gems lot, swift and sharp. By 1972, whispers turned into full-on noise, and once the secret hit daylight, it torched every thread tying the cast, the crew, and the couple at the eye of the storm. Bewitched didn't wind down. It stopped cold in its 8th season, like someone killed the power mid-laughter. People called it the chain of betrayals, and the name stuck like glue. William betrayed first, Elizabeth later, and in one helpless flash, she saw herself becoming what she once hated in her father, hurting people while believing she was doing the right thing. Guilt hangs around like a scent you can't wash off, and it followed her for years, through 1973 and into the 1980s, step for step. Then came the slow lesson, learning to breathe again. When the studio lights finally went dark, Elizabeth walked away from the parties, the empty compliments, the cold hands, and then she met Robert Foxworth, steady as a lake, not a lightning strike, not dominance, but presence. Encino mornings, later Beverly Hills evenings. A simple rhythm, calm enough for her to finally hear her own heartbeat. Peace arrived with quiet moves.
Her name is Gail Wolfer. His name is Bob Sprague, and they live outside of Buffalo. And they are absolutely extraordinary people. And if they're watching, hi.
Foxworth didn't try to fix her or set the tempo. He stood beside her so she could find her own balance. No scoreboard, no spotlight, just real life. If William was a polished mirror of Robert, Foxworth was the reflection of the peace she'd been chasing her whole life. They lived together for years before marrying by choice. Calm, deliberate, like putting the old wedding dress back in the glass case and choosing a warm sweater for windy days in Laurel Canyon. In the quiet, Elizabeth finally stared straight into the Montgomery loop, the pattern running her life like a hidden script. Frederick felt safe, but he wanted her to shrink herself to fit his world. Gig had that charge, all power and pressure, stormy and sharp. William, the genius, turned romance into a score he conducted, every beat measured. Richard was an exit sign that cost too much, and Foxworth, he was the first man to rest a hand on her shoulder without steering her anywhere, just letting her be. Line up their faces and the message clicks. She'd been picking men who carried her father's rules in different suits. Be quiet, be good, stay still. Same command, different volume. Every time she pushed back, life cracked like glass, piece by piece. Only with Fox did the message flip. Now it said, "You can be you." After 1975, she kept her private life close, like a secret note folded in a pocket. On a windy day at the Santa Monica Pier, she told a reporter, "I no longer need to break something to prove I exist. I just need to breathe." The words floated light as sea spray, but they were heavy with truth. A manifesto from someone who finally found the exit to the maze. Love stopped being a battlefield and stopped reflecting her father's face. It turned into a place to rest, to warm up, to feel whole. No more performance for approval, no more playing small to keep the peace. Look at her romances like rings on water, circling out from a single drop. At the center, Robert Montgomery. The first ring, men built like him. The second, the rebellions still trapped in his gravity. And then, at last, the calm ring she chose for herself. The one that said, "Breathe, live, stay you." And there it was. The outermost ring life, wide, still, and finally peaceful. Robert Foxworth. From New York in 1954 to Los Angeles in 1972, Elizabeth's love story had been a long road of heartbreaks, experiments, and lessons carved into her soul. Every man, every loss, every comeback led her to one simple truth that so many young hearts forget. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want in front of someone. It's not needing anyone's permission to do it. By early 1995, when illness came knocking at her door, Foxworth was still right there, steady as ever, holding her hand, reading her letters from fans, helping her stand when the fatigue hit hard. Their love didn't need fireworks or grand speeches. It was soft, private, and unshakable, like a quiet room with the windows open. sunlight spilling in. In that space, Elizabeth finally set down every mask. Samantha, the star, the daughter of Robert Montgomery, and just existed as Elizabeth. She was tired enough to lean on a shoulder, but strong enough to forgive, even herself. Because forgiveness, she learned, wasn't weakness. It was freedom finally landing on her doorstep. If her whole story had a red thread running through it, it was this: a deep, aching need to be herself while standing next to someone else. And only after walking through the echoes of her father, Frederick, Gig, William, and Richard, did she reach the calm at the end of the loop. Foxworth. With him, she no longer loved in rebellion or for validation. She loved because she wanted to live. That love didn't shrink her. It expanded her. Quietly, gently, and strong enough to carry her through her final days in Beverly Hills, 1995. A woman who had finally escaped the whirlwind and found peace that no script could ever write. Elizabeth truly believed she'd found peace in her final marriage with Robert Foxworth, a calm at last after years of chaos. But for someone who had lived through storms her whole life, complete stillness felt almost foreign. When love stopped being the thing that filled every corner of her heart, she naturally drifted back to the one place that had always defined her, the glowing lights of the studio. And with that return, another side of her began to rise, mysterious, spiritual, and deeply magnetic. This was Elizabeth Montgomery, the woman who believed in real magic. Not just the kind that made people laugh on TV. On screen, as Samantha in Bewitched, all she needed was a twitch of her nose to change the world around her. But off screen, Elizabeth believed in something much deeper, unseen forces more powerful than fame, talent, or even the best written script. She swore there were energies that guided life itself. Energies she felt pulsing around her since the height of Bewitched in Los Angeles, 1966. By then, no one on set doubted that Elizabeth was the soul of the entire studio. Every morning, she arrived earlier than everyone else, her presence calm but electric, like she carried a secret rhythm no one else could hear. People whispered that she always had a small stone tucked into her pocket, her energy charm. She said it came from a tiny village in Massachusetts, the same area that once held the dark history of the Salem witch trials. Elizabeth claimed that the stone carried good vibrations, keeping her surrounded by positive energy and making every filming day flow smoother than magic. Her co-star, Agnes Moorehead, who played Samantha's fiery mother in Dora, once revealed a curious habit Elizabeth had before every shoot. Agnes said, before every scene, Elizabeth wouldn't talk to anyone. She'd just sit still, hands on her knees, eyes closed, murmuring something softly. It wasn't superstition. It was ritual. A quiet moment where Elizabeth connected with something unseen, something she believed powered both her performance and her peace. When Elizabeth opened her eyes after those quiet moments of meditation, something about her always changed. She seemed lighter, brighter, almost glowing, but also a little distant, like she'd stepped halfway into another world. And of course, in Hollywood, where every secret becomes a headline, that aura of mystery didn't go unnoticed. One night, a lighting technician swore he saw something strange. After everyone had left the set, he came back to shut down the lights and spotted Elizabeth sitting alone in her dressing room. A single candle flickered beside her as her lips moved softly, whispering what sounded like an incantation. When he asked about it the next day, she just smiled, that calm, unreadable smile, and said, "It's just my little ritual to send good energy for tomorrow." Some people brushed it off as a harmless habit, but others couldn't stop talking. And in a town where mystery sells faster than truth, the whispers caught fire. Soon, tabloids were running wild with headlines. One 1967 magazine even screamed, "Elizabeth Montgomery, the girl who doesn't just play a witch, she lives like one." The story exploded overnight, and suddenly Samantha's magic didn't feel so fictional anymore. But Elizabeth didn't fight back. She didn't yell, deny, or try to explain. She just kept that same faint, mysterious smile, the kind that made everyone wonder if maybe, just maybe, the rumors weren't completely wrong. The quieter she became, the louder the grew. One crew member remembered a moment that gave them chills. Elizabeth walked onto the set, blew a soft kiss toward the empty audience seats, and said, thank you for today's energy. No one knew who she was talking to, Betsy. But that day, every single scene went perfectly. One take each, flawless. No retakes, no do-overs. Some of her closest colleagues stood by her saying Elizabeth wasn't superstitious. She was spiritual. She believed in energy, in how emotion could ripple through the air and shape what followed. A lighting director once said, maybe she didn't really think she was a witch, but I think she believed in the power of thought. And sometimes, belief itself is a kind of magic. Still, not everyone could handle Elizabeth's mysterious vibe. Some crew members started keeping their distance, claiming there was something about her gaze, too calm, too deep, like she could see straight through all of Hollywood's glitter and lies. A few even whispered that she carried some kind of strange energy, the kind that made weird things happen on set. Microphones crashing out of nowhere, lights flickering for no reason, props shifting when no one was near them. Of course, no one could ever prove a thing, but in Hollywood, coincidence doesn't stay coincidence for long. It turns into legend. Soon, the name Elizabeth Montgomery, the real-life witch, began echoing through studio corridors and magazine headlines alike. People wanted to believe in the story, even if it scared them just a little. When a reporter finally asked her about the rumors in a 1970 interview, Elizabeth just laughed, resting her chin in her hand. Her eyes sparkled, amused but soft, touched by something wistful. Then she said, if believing in good things is magic, then I suppose I really am a witch. That answer, gentle, clever, and perfectly in between, charmed everyone. Fans didn't see darkness in her. They saw light. They believed Elizabeth's magic wasn't about spells or curses, but about energy. That quiet belief that kindness, love, and courage could actually shift the world around you. Her magic was the kind that made people feel seen. But maybe that same belief that you could shape reality with heart alone pulled her slowly away from the real world. By the late 1970s, Elizabeth grew more private, almost reclusive. Friends said she'd sit for hours by the window, candles burning low, soft jazz filling the air, scribbling cryptic lines into her journal. One entry read, "The light inside me is still fine." Some said she was simply talking to herself, finding peace in her own reflection. Others swore she was reaching out, not to fame or memory, but to another world entirely, one untouched by betrayal, one where the light never dimmed. Without her father's shadow looming over her, and without the heartbreak that once defined her, Elizabeth Montgomery became something Hollywood had never seen before. A witch without a wand, without spells, but with a power that made people believe, fear, and adore her all at once. Those little candles she lit, those whispered words in the dark, they weren't props or tricks. They were her way of channeling something real, something that pulled people in, like a spell they couldn't explain. Everyone on the Bewitched set swore Elizabeth carried a strange kind of energy. But it wasn't the creepy kind. It was sharper, more commanding. The kind that made cameras behave and hearts race. That energy didn't just keep the production smooth. It made everyone around her feel her presence, like gravity itself had shifted. Behind the camera, Samantha the Witch wasn't just the sweet wife America adored. She was the queen of the entire Bewitched kingdom. On screen, Samantha was all charm, playful, clever, solving chaos with a twitch of her nose. But off screen, Elizabeth was a perfectionist with laser focus. On stage 5 in Hollywood, she ruled the set like an artist guarding her masterpiece. First to arrive, last to leave, always watching every shot, every light, every line. If something wasn't right, she'd stop the entire scene without hesitation. One crew member once said, no one dared turn on the lights until she nodded. She didn't need to yell or throw fits. Her silence said it all. When Elizabeth wasn't pleased, the whole atmosphere changed. The air grew tight and heavy, like a storm building behind her calm expression. Just a few minutes of her quiet could make the director or cinematographer scrap an entire sequence. People on set used to joke, half laughing, half nervous, calling her the controlling witch.
I mean, everybody says, oh, you must go. It's like Eden. And you say, yeah, sure. But once you get there, you really understand what they're talking about. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's just the most amazingly magical place. It's super.
Not because she was cruel, but because she had this unspoken authority that everyone respected, and maybe feared just a little. One look from Elizabeth could reset the room. No words, no gestures, just pure command. Her dynamic with Dick York, who played Darren, Samantha's husband, showed this energy clearer than anything else. Their chemistry sparked like lightning on screen, but behind the scenes, that same force between them could turn from playful to intense in an instant. Elizabeth didn't just play magic, she was magic. And everyone who worked with her knew it the moment she stepped on set. In the early days, Elizabeth Montgomery and Dick York had real chemistry. Not just on screen, but behind the scenes too. They laughed between takes, shared jokes, and carried a rhythm that made Bewitched sparkle. But as the show's fame exploded, so did the pressure. The workload became relentless, and Dick's health, already fragile from a serious back injury years earlier, began to crumble under the strain. Elizabeth, always disciplined and driven, wanted every scene to hit perfection. Dick, meanwhile, was fighting pain no one else could see. Some days he could barely stand. Others, he'd push through until his body finally gave out. Then came that day in early 1968, during the filming of the episode A Very Special Delivery. Mid-scene, Dick York suddenly collapsed. Chaos broke loose across the set. Elizabeth was the first to rush toward him, but she didn't panic or cry out. She just stood there, silent, watching him with eyes that said everything, concern, confusion, and maybe even a touch of detachment, before quietly stepping aside. After that day, something invisible shifted between them. The warmth was gone. When Dick took a long medical leave, the distance only grew. In later episodes, they spoke only when the cameras rolled. Once cut was called, they'd drift to opposite sides of the set, quiet, avoiding each other's eyes. One crew member described it best. They were like two magnets flipped the wrong way, close but always repelling. By 1969, as Dick's condition worsened, the studio faced a hard decision: shut Bewitched down or find a replacement. That's when rumors began to swirl down Hollywood Boulevard, whispers that Elizabeth herself had urged Screen Gems to recast the role. Allegedly, she suggested Dick Sargent, saying he was more in sync with her and more dependable for the show's pace. Soon after, the studio made it official. Dick York was out, and Dick Sargent stepped in starting season 6. The reaction was explosive. York's loyal fans were furious, flooding networks with protest letters and accusing Elizabeth of betrayal, of pushing out a co-star when he was most vulnerable. But Elizabeth stayed silent. She didn't defend, deny, or explain. Then, in a short 1970 interview, she finally spoke. Just one cryptic line that left everyone guessing: we had to keep going. Every kind of magic needs change to survive. That statement, calm, mysterious, and loaded with subtext, only deepened the divide. Some saw it as cold. Others saw it as strength. But one thing was clear: Elizabeth Montgomery wasn't just the face of Bewitched anymore. She was its ruler, steering the magic even when it meant breaking hearts. Some defended her, others tore her apart. But one thing nobody could deny: after that storm with Dick York, Elizabeth Montgomery ruled the Bewitched set completely. From directors to camera operators to co-stars, everyone knew one truth. When Elizabeth spoke, even in silence, things moved. She didn't shout, she didn't threaten, but the moment she wasn't pleased, the entire production froze like a spell had been cast. No matter how technically flawless a scene was, if Elizabeth felt something was off, even slightly, it was redone. People whispered, "No one dares go against Elizabeth, not even the director." She had this quiet authority, a kind of gravity that pulled everything into her orbit. One story became almost legend on the lot. During a late-night shoot, Elizabeth stopped everything and told the crew, "The energy isn't clear today." Without hesitation, she demanded the entire lighting setup be changed. It sounded strange to everyone, borderline superstitious, but the crew followed her lead. And the result: that very scene ended up being hailed as one of the most stunning moments of the entire season. Her former colleague, second unit director Michael Gordon, once said she didn't need power, she radiated it. And he was right. Elizabeth didn't chase control, she was controlled. They're calm, magnetic, and quietly commanding. But that same strength came with a cost. It isolated her. After filming wrapped each day when the cast and crew hit the bars along Melrose Avenue to celebrate, Elizabeth would quietly slip away. No grand exits, no entourage, just her alone, heading back to her small Beverly Hills home where soft jazz played low and candles flickered against the walls. The woman who once lit up the whole studio spent her nights in silence, surrounded by the glow of her own light. By the end of 1972, when Bewitched officially wrapped its 8th season, Elizabeth didn't throw a farewell party or give one of those emotional goodbye interviews. Instead, she sent the studio a short handwritten note that said, "Thank you for the magic. It's time for Samantha to sleep." And with that, she disappeared from Hollywood's spotlight. For years, she took on almost no major roles, retreating into her own world. Yet even in her absence, people still whispered about her, not just as a star, but as the real witch of Hollywood, the woman whose magic felt far too real to fade. She was the woman who could silence an entire crew with just one glance, who could bend the energy of a whole set until it moved to her rhythm, and who, in the end, paid a heavy price for that power. When the cameras stopped rolling and the lights finally dimmed, Elizabeth Montgomery often found herself alone in an empty dressing room, staring quietly into her mirror, staring not at herself, but at the faint reflection of Samantha, that bright, smiling witch the world adored. Only now there was no magic sparkle in her eyes, just a quiet woman facing her own reflection. When Bewitched ended, Elizabeth finally walked away from the flashing lights, ready for a calm life beside her 4th husband, Robert Foxworth. For the first time in decades, it seemed peace might actually be possible, but Hollywood never really let go of her. Not Elizabeth Montgomery, not Samantha. Every time reruns aired, that same smile returned to living rooms across America, bright, effortless, and forever young. She had become timeless, almost immortal through the screen. But behind that eternal glow, time was still moving, and no spell could stop it. The woman who once made millions believe in magic was slowly facing the one truth no enchantment could change: death. Spring, 1995, Miami. Elizabeth, now 62, was on location filming the TV movie Deadline for Murder from the files of Edna Buchanan. The heat was thick, the air heavy, and she began to feel unwell. To everyone else, it looked like exhaustion. Just another long day on set. She brushed off concern, told Foxworth over the phone, "I'm fine." Her voice steady, her calm never cracking. But her colleagues noticed the difference. Her skin looked pale, her breath short, and the light in her eyes, that famous glow, seemed to flicker. When she returned to Los Angeles, Foxworth saw right through her brave face. He persuaded her to see a doctor at Cedars-Sinai, the hospital that had treated so many Hollywood icons. Elizabeth agreed, more to ease his worry than her own. But beneath that poise, her body was already fighting a silent, merciless battle. Even as her health waned, she carried herself with that same quiet dignity. The same woman who once ruled an entire studio with a look now faced her greatest challenge with nothing but calm strength and grace. The cameras were gone, the set was dark, but her presence, her magic, was still unmistakable. The results stunned everyone. The diagnosis was brutal. Late-stage colorectal cancer already spread to the liver. Elizabeth sat still, clutching her robe like armor, and asked one simple question: "How long do I have?" The doctor didn't answer, and she read the silence like a headline, then chose a path only someone who truly believed in the magic of freedom could choose. She refused the sterile ending of a hospital, standing firm in her soft, steady way. "I don't want to die under the cold lights of a hospital. I want to see candlelight, hear music, and smell the wood of my house." A few days later, she went back to her small Beverly Hills home. Jasmine by the door, an old piano by the window, the kind of quiet that feels like a hug. Robert Foxworth stayed right there with her every single night, reading letters from fans and holding her hand through the waves of fatigue like a rock in a storm. In those final days, she carried out a ritual nobody knew about until later, a private act that said everything without a speech. Foxworth remembered it clearly. One evening, he walked in and saw her feeding the fireplace with old letters, dozens, maybe hundreds, all in her father, Robert Montgomery's handwriting. Elizabeth didn't explain. She just gave a sad little smile, like she was closing a door only she could see. She kept just one photograph from 1940. She was 7, hugging her father, beaming. "It's the only photo where he ever looked at me gently," she whispered, tucking it into the last page of her diary where she had written, "Father never believed in magic, but I do, even if it's only to keep him in my heart." On May 18th, 1995, just 33 days after her 62nd birthday, Elizabeth Montgomery passed away in her sleep in that very house, the air soft with candlelight and memory. Beside her was Foxworth, the only one present, steady to the very last moment as the woman who once made the world believe in magic slipped away with quiet grace. No breathing tubes, no machines humming, just the soft scent of candles and the low murmur of the jazz she loved drifting through the air. That was how Elizabeth Montgomery left this world, calm, beautiful, and entirely on her own terms. When news of her passing hit the headlines, America mourned deeply. The press called it the passing of television's last classic witch. But not long after her funeral, strange stories began to swirl across Hollywood. Within less than a decade, several cast members from Bewitched, including Alice Pierce, who played Gladys Kravitz, along with Dick York and Paul Lynde, also died, most of them in middle age, from illness or sudden tragedy. It didn't take long for the tabloids to pounce. They branded it the Bewitched curse. Whispers spread fast. People claimed that Stage 5, the very sound stage where the show was filmed, had become haunted. Security guards swore the lights would flicker late at night when the building was empty. Some even said they'd seen a faint figure of a woman in a white dress gliding through the doorway where Samantha's living room used to be, her silhouette framed in that ghostly studio glow. One technician even told a chilling story. "I was shutting off the power when I heard a laugh. Soft, familiar, just like Samantha's laugh from the show. No one ever caught it on tape, but that didn't stop the legend from spreading like wildfire. Rumors grew so thick that Screen Gems had to bring in night security just to keep people from sneaking in to see for themselves." A reporter from the Los Angeles Times once wrote, "Perhaps the curse was invented by Hollywood itself, because in this town, nothing lives longer than an unsolved legend." But those who had truly known Elizabeth said something different. To them, the so-called curse wasn't supernatural. It was emotional. They said Elizabeth's death wasn't part of any dark spell, but the quiet closing of a soul that had burned too brightly for too long. She was a woman who had spent her life trying to control everything, love, image, destiny, until she came face to face with the one force no one can ever command, mortality. Her funeral was held quietly at the Cannon Theater in Beverly Hills. No spectacle, no spotlight, just close friends, family, and a few white lilies beside her portrait. The world lost its favorite witch that day, but the legend of Elizabeth Montgomery, the woman who made magic feel real, refused to fade. Herbie Hancock played the piece Elizabeth loved, and Robert Forward read the final lines from her journal. "If magic exists, it lives in human kindness, where love has never truly died." The room went still as glass, like the words themselves were floating in the air. More than 3 decades have passed. Bewitched still lights up TV screens, and every time Samantha twitches her nose, people see Elizabeth Montgomery, the woman who made the world believe in magic, then reminded us every magic casts a shadow. Hollywood media keeps repeating a line that spread after her funeral, almost like a quiet spell. Anyone who ever stepped onto the Bewitched set carries a piece of its magic and its darkness. 30 years have gone by since Elizabeth Montgomery's death, but only now has her daughter, Rebecca Asher, dared to confirm what everyone whispered for years. What Hollywood whispered for decades, my mother betrayed, loved, believed, and feared, but above all, she just wanted to be loved as an ordinary human being. That single sentence, simple on the surface, unlocks everything behind the title of the Bewitched Witch, behind the roles, the rumors, and the spotlight. Elizabeth Montgomery wasn't a myth. She was a person searching for love, a kind she never fully felt while she was here. Fans remember the kind smile and the bright eyes, But the real Elizabeth was layered and complicated. Calm on the outside, stormy underneath, a soul full of sparks and contradictions. Compassionate yet lonely, strong yet scared of being tied down. That was her rhythm, and it showed in the way she lived and worked. Friends said she was always the first to help young actors, giving chances, advice, even money when it mattered. But she also kept an invisible line around her private life, a boundary nobody crossed. She carried grace like armor and mystery like perfume, close enough to touch, just far enough to keep the myth alive. And that's why the legend still breathes today, because behind Samantha's wink was a real woman just trying to be loved. No tricks, no wand, only heart. Screenwriter Susan Harris put it bluntly. She had real magic, not from her nose twitch, but from her eyes that look made. You feel both seen and kept outside at the same time. That gaze could lift you up and hold you at arm's length in the same breath, haunting and unforgettable. As the years rolled on, Elizabeth stepped back from the set and leaned into purpose. Children's charities, speaking out against the Vietnam War, backing the women's equality movement, moving with quiet fire like she had something to set right. Many felt it was her way of balancing the scales with her past and with a conservative father who believed women should stand behind men. In a 1989 interview, she said, "I can't change what my father taught, but I can live by what he feared most, freedom." That line hit like truth, clean, fierce, and free. In her twilight years, she kept it peaceful in Beverly Hills with Robert Foxworth, a small house lit by candles, scented, calm, like a private sanctuary that held one shadow she never fully outran, her father's. Then in 2025, at a 30th anniversary memorial for Elizabeth Montgomery, her family unveiled something no one had ever seen, a letter never sent, found in an old diary beside that 1940 photo of father and daughter she kept till the end. The letter read, "Dearest Father, it took me many years to understand why you never told me I was good. Why you feared that. I was like you. Now I understand. Neither of us knew how to love without hurting. I forgive you. Perhaps I am more like you than I thought." It was raw, simple, and brave. A quiet spell of forgiveness cast over decades of silence. Rebecca Asher read it on camera, voice shaking, but eyes steady with pride. "My mother was not just an actress. She was the one who taught me that real magic doesn't live in a twitching nose, but in the courage to forgive even your own past. That's the real enchantment, and not smoke and mirrors, but the nerve to face your history and choose mercy anyway." The room went completely still. Not a sound, not a word. A soft breeze slipped through the open window, brushing against the old Bewitched posters on the wall, making Samantha's smiling face seem almost alive again. 30 years later, it felt as if Elizabeth Montgomery was still right there, the woman who made the whole world believe in magic, yet never mastered the one spell she longed for most, to be loved by her father simply as his daughter. Maybe that quiet, unfulfilled wish, that small, invisible ache, was what gave her that otherworldly glow, turning her into the witch of the heart. The woman whose magic wasn't made of tricks or special effects, but of something deeper, something human. Even after leaving this world, she still makes people believe that inside each of us lives a little spark of magic. If only we learn how to love and forgive. 3 decades after her passing, Elizabeth Montgomery's story still refuses to fade. Like Samantha's legendary nose twitch, just hearing her name is enough to summon memories of that golden age of television. A time of faith, wonder, and tenderness wrapped in shadow. Her legend isn't just the story of a star. It's a reminder for all of us that behind every shimmer of magic lies a heart that has known pain. Elizabeth Montgomery wasn't just the bewitched witch. She was a woman who lived fiercely, loved deeply, made mistakes, and forgave in the most human, most courageous way possible. And if any kind of real magic still lingers after all these years, it's the kind she left behind. The kind that whispers that kindness and courage can still soften every sorrow, even in a world that sometimes forgets both. If this story touched even a corner of your heart, drop a comment below. Tell us what Elizabeth's story means to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story as we keep uncovering the secrets, the heartbreaks, and the last traces of true magic left behind Hollywood's bright lights.